Okay, we are in Siman, the next Siman Kuf Lamed, which are the halachas of Aseret Simei Tshuva. If everyone could please join us, that would be wonderful. Sif Aleph, yeah. So Siman Kuf Lamed Sif Aleph. You have like this: Aseret Simei Tshuva Shmam Moira Aleim. The name of them tells us what they are. Shehem Yuchadim LeTshuva. These are days that are set aside for tshuva. The call Adam Mechuyev Az Lashu B'Tshuva Shlema Lifnei Hashem Yisbarach Shemai. Every single person has a requirement to return to Hashem with a full tshuva. Before this great and awesome day arrives. What's the great and awesome day? Yom Kippurim. Shenamar, because it says in the pasuk, Lifnei Hashem Titaru, that before Hashem you should make yourself pure, meaning before you arrive. V'namar, and it says in another pasuk, Dirshu Hashem b'himatzah, like we say in the Haftarah, that Dirshu Hashem b'himatzah means search for Hashem where He is found. What does it mean, search for Hashem where He's found? Like the famous joke of the guy from Cham, that he's looking for his keys, and the guy says, I've been looking for 5 hours, I can't find it. He goes, well, where'd you lose it? So he goes, over there, by my car. So he says, why are you looking over here? So he goes, yeah, it's under the light. So while you're under the light. So if you're searching for Hashem when He's close, what does that mean? So the Chachamim explain. These are the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And obviously it's a little tricky in between because there's only 7 days in between. Fine. But the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur are special days that are set aside to return to Hashem. Therefore, a person needs to search and go through his behaviors and to return from not appropriate behavior. Usfeik aveda, and here's a very interesting point. I think we mentioned it before. I don't remember. Usfeik aveda tzlicha yoser tshuva me'aveda vadois. If a person has a problem in aveda that he doesn't know for sure if he did the aveda, you need to do tshuva stronger for those than for anything else. Why? So he explains very simply: Ki yoser mischare to adam kishehu yodea she'asa aveda. If a person knows that they did an aveda, it's much easier for them to do tshuva because it's in front of their face. They did something wrong. They have to return to Hashem. They have to fix it. However, if a person doesn't know if they actually did aveda, so then they could always have an excuse. I didn't do it. I didn't disturb. I was learning. I didn't eat this. I didn't do that. Maybe I did. I didn't know what I was thinking. So because they could excuse it and they could always come up with a justification, they don't feel they have to do a proper tshuva. And therefore he continues and he says, Karban Asham Tale, when it comes to the carbon that you would bring, which was a carbon on a mistake, which is called the Asham Tale, so it's actually more expensive than a carbon chatas, because a carbon chatas was straightforward. A person did something wrong, they know it, they want to do tshuva, wonderful. But a carbon that a person didn't even know if they did something wrong, so therefore they could play around. So therefore the kapara had to be a little bit stronger. Now we say Avinu Malkeinu during these days, which not everyone does, by the way, and Shir Malais and Oisa Hashalom and Uksei L'chaim Tovim, all these things that we do during this time, some of it has to do with this reason because we're close to Hashem and we're trying to do tshuva. In addition to that, every single day of the Aseret Samei Tshuva, which is really the 7 days between Hashanah and Yom Kippur, are connected that day of the week for the previous year. So just like from Chai Elul till Rosh Hashanah, you have 12 days, and each of those days represent a month of the previous year. So too, from after Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, every day represents that day of the week, and therefore we should invest in it to correct anything in the whole past year we may have done on that day. Now, he continues on the next page and he says like this: during this Seres Tshuva, a person should increase in their Torah, mitzvah, tzedakah, all these things. And they should limit their work. Now, what does that mean? Because of Harav Rabbeinu Moshe Cordovero, so the Moshe Cordovero is known as the Ramak. He lived a little bit before the times of the Arizal in Tzvas. He was a Kabbalist. His brother-in-law was Reb Shlomo Alkabetz, the one who wrote the Lechadoidi that we sing, also another Kabbalist. So this was his brother. So they're big Mikubalim. So he writes, you should treat these days like Cholamoid. What does that mean? Now we think Cholamoid, we do everything, right? If you look at halacha, it's not so posh that you could do everything on Cholamoid. But either way, he said during these days you should only do things that are very pressing, that your mamas need. What's the word I'm trying to think? I can't remember. Whatever, things that you need. However, necessary. That was the word. Necessary. Only necessary things. Dvarim shebeinoi lebein chaveirei. Now, if you have to focus on what to correct, you should be spending the time correcting things that happen between you and your fellow. Those are the ones that you have to correct. More asher, why? Because asher aleim in kapara. On these things, you don't get forgiven. You don't get forgiven if you offended someone else. You don't get forgiven if you offend someone else, or if you took something from someone else. You actually have to return what you took. You only get forgiven between you and the Eibishter on Yom Kippur. But everything else, you have to go to the person and say, "I'm sorry." You can't start, crying to the Eibishter that you did something when the person who you offended is there. It doesn't work. So you have to actually apologize to the person or make it right. And therefore, the focus during then should be on that. Because in this person, you don't just get forgiveness automatically. You actually have to ask them. You have to correct it by giving back whatever it is that, God forbid, someone took or whatever it was. That's the only way to do it. Now, these days in general, we try to be a little bit more strict about certain things. For example, we don't make a chedim or things like that on people that it's a time of din. We don't want to emphasize someone's bad behavior. It's like, if the principal's walking by, I'll try not to call out someone's name when they're disturbing, as I might do other times, because it just draws more attention to them, and it's just not... it's not benevolent. It's not kind. So we don't want to do that in front of the Eibush. We're going to start saying, "Let's put this person in chayim because he's not calling out people's avedis." It's not the right time for that. Okay, sit base. Because these days are so unique and close to the Eibishter, it's an opportune time to do things that you normally don't do in terms of being extra careful in your zehirus of doing mitzvahs. Because we're doing the same thing. We're trying to ask Hashem Yisbarach Shmoi sheisnai gimanu b'chasidus. We want that Hashem should treat us kindly. So therefore, we have to and do more for us than what we deserve, sort of. So we have to do the same thing. Take on ourselves more things than what we would normally do, and this way elicit from Hashem the same type of reaction. So one of the famous things would be people that use what we don't call pas Yisrael. They buy bread from a bakery, let's say, which they used to do a lot more commonly for sure when all the breads were kosher. Now they add stuff, so it's a little bit more complicated. But Amol, even now, I think in France and certain places in Europe where they have like a certain way of dealing with old bakeries, so maybe some people still do it. But obviously things change. But it used to be that they would eat from a place. They would go there and be able to eat from a bakery. But it's not a yid. So during these days, you should only eat pas Yisrael, which is the best thing, including other types of chumras. Hopefully, we're all careful in the things that we eat. So in general, we don't have this concern. But if a person sometimes eats more questionable types of hashkachas, during this time, it's an opportune time to make sure that you're only eating the best. Siv Gimel. Some people have the minig, it's not ours, that they say special at Rachamav. We don't do that. Siv Daled. Some people don't get married during these days. Some people don't get married actually the whole Tishrei, but that we for sure don't do. People do get married, especially now that there's just, but I think after Yom Tov for sure. I think, I don't know that I've seen people get married, but I don't know for sure either way. Siv Daled, B'Shabbos Shuva, Yeshlikari Lamafter Adam Chashu. On Shabbos Shuva, you should call someone who's Adam Chashu because it has to do with Shuva. You want to awaken the people. I saw somewhere that you don't call a kid, which they used to do. They used to call kids for Maftir, probably because kids loved after did they do Avedis or things like that. Okay, now we also don't say Avinu Malkeinu on Shabbos, even though we say it the rest of the days, because you're not allowed to ask for your own personal things. And on Shabbos, and Avinu Malkeinu is all about asking Hashem for things that we need, and fine. Siva, yeah. Some people have the minig, and this is our minig, that we don't do Kiddush Levana until after Yom Kippur, and partly because it's a time of din, as we mentioned, and therefore, for some reason, something doesn't work, and it explains why dafka after Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur itself, we're happy, but before Yom Kippur, before the end of Yom Kippur, we're a little concerned. Are we going to have a good judgment, not a good judgment? Fine. So that's the say that we get to Yom Kippur. I don't know if we'll get to the end of Yom Kippur, but if we do, we'll talk about how to do Kiddush Levana. Some people say exactly the opposite. Yeah, you should really do Kiddush Levana before, because you want to have more schuyas. And everything is depending on the time. Meaning sometimes it's not even shaykh to do it before it's cloudy or this. You have to be sensitive. If you're not going to do it, let's say earlier, but it's going to be cloudy and stormy and whatever, you're not going to be able to do it till later, so do it earlier. So you have to keep that in mind. In a place where they have a meaning that they buy a sregim early, so then and love him and adasim. So some people have this They know zizim akdim, they try to do it early and get it. In order to count this as another mitzvah, that they also have their lulav, they're already getting ready for Sukkot. So a few things I want to add to this is that number one, after Yom Kippur, and the day after Rosh Hashanah, saying Gedalia. Yeah. Person knows that they're not going to be able to fast on Yom Kippur. If they fast on Yom Kippur, if they fast on Tzem Gedalia, so it's probably better not to fast on Tzem Gedalia, skip it, and this way you could fast on Yom Kippur, which is obviously a much stricter fast. That's number one. Number two is that the Rebbe Rashab used to mention all the Rabbeim, starting from actually the Arizal and the Rashbi, the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid, and all the rest of the Rabbeim. He would make sure to mention them on all the days of Sluchos, either with a story, a piskim, a story, a vart, or something like that. You know, Schus Avos, I guess. One time, the women used to say Slichas during Aseret Shmei Tshuva. We don't say Slichas, we do on Tzem Gedalia, but not because it's Aseret Shmei Tshuva, because it's a fast day. But the women, by the Rebbe's house, the Beis Harab, the Taka used to say Slichas. And but one of the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Marash, I believe, once commented, and he said that there's different times. He says at site to Zogin, which is to say Slichas, and then he says at site to Ton, to do. And that was a time of Semi Tshuva that he was saying, we're not saying Slichas, we do. But the women used to say it, and maybe others as well. But it was a time to do, learn more, like we said before, and things like that. You wish people Chsivo Gmar Chsima Tova. Shabbos Tshuva. The question is, so there's a few things about candles. I don't know if we'll get into it now, but people had a minute that they used to light what's called what do you call it? Licht, the tshuva licht. It's called the tshuva licht. Just a second, 1 second. So they would light a tshuva licht, and that was it was one of the three. They would, in other words, they would do other ones on 1 second. Okay, so sorry. So they so they would so the question is, if you dip in, what's it called? If you dip in okay, I'm sorry, just give me a second, half a second here. Okay, so the question is, do you dip in honey or not? Do you dip the challah into honey or not? It's a little complicated. The Rebbe actually wrote a second part of Yom Yom that was never fully printed, but it is, you could find it. In the second part of Yom Yom, the Rebbe wrote that the days that you dip are Rosh Hashanah and Erev Yom Kippur, and then the days of Sukkot, and then Shana Rabbah. And so the question over there was, what about Shabbos on Chol Hamoed? And I believe over there the Rebbe said something that you do based on something about the Rebbe, but Shabbos Tshuva doesn't say anything. So you have people both ways. I think the minig is that we basically use honey all the way through, and people do dip it in. But however, we're also going to dip it into salt. This is really, I don't know if we mentioned this when we're learning Rosh Hashanah. We dip it into honey, and I mentioned that we also dip it into salt. So I guess the same thing would be here. So that's another thing that comes out from here. And then obviously Vav Tishrei is the yard site of the Rebbe's mother, and we have amazing, beautiful sichos that the Rebbe benched us with about Chana and the Tfilos Chana and davening and very wonderful things that as a result of that. Yeah, okay, that was it for the Aseret Shmei Tshuva, and we'll start with Kippur after.